our talk tonight is going to be not by Father Mark. As somebody was saying, it's going to be Father Mark, is going to be me. And I said, no, it's going to be Jeff Atwater. And Jeff is a sponsor here for a candidate. And he also hails from Houston, Texas. And in Houston, for many, many years, he was on RCIA team and taught. And so Father Mark and he got to talking, and so Father Mark suggested that he asked if he would be willing to give his talk on Christian morality. And so that's what the talk is going to be about, is Christian morality.
Fortunately, we have handouts. As Deacon Mike said, I went through RCIA in Houston and was on the team for many years. And I've learned a lot about faith. And I've found that the more you learn, the more sense it makes. So I'm here to tell you more about our faith. It's really a great faith. And I've done many presentations in Houston, but this is my first time here, so I'm a newbie. It's a different experience. I also want to say that I am a member of the Knights of Columbus. I joined in October. I've done community service my whole life, but I have to tell you there's something special about performing acts of service with the common faith. If you have any questions about it, please look into it further. I'm on slide 2. Where does Christian morality come? We need to start with the Ten Commandments. This is the oldest written code of moral behavior. The Jewish tradition tells us that the commandments relating to God were on one side, the commandments relating to everybody else were on the other side. And the Christian morality builds off that. Christian morality probably started when Jesus was asked the question, what is the first commandment? And most people, when they hear that, they launch right away into you'll love the Lord God with all your heart, etc. But there's a phrase in front of that, and that's called the Shema. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is Lord alone. And there are a couple of reasons why Jesus put that in there. First of all, this whole thing from Hear, O Israel down through all of the different versions of love constituted the morning offering, the morning prayer of the many pious Jews at the time. So they'd start off with the Shema and go through all those things. One exception, Jesus added the phrase, with all your mind. That wasn't in the original prayer. That's part of the genius of Christianity. Another reason it would be in there is when you hear the words, Hear, O Israel. When you read the Old Testament, you have to read these things deeply so it can have other meanings. It does mean listen for sure, but it also means take action, do something, make God the center of your life. So what Jesus did is he took something that was ordinary, the morning offering, and elevated it to a position of supreme importance. And he did pretty much the same thing with the second. You can find this in the Old Testament if you know where to look. It's hard to find. But again, Jesus took this from a place where it was obscure and made it of supreme importance. And it's also the perfect commandment of the age of faith. And once again, we have one commandment for our relationship with God and another commandment for our relationship with everyone else. And the search for morality has been going on for a long time. I should say about the Ten Commandments is They defined morality at the time, and even though it was thousands of years ago, it's still relevant because morality has not changed. Morality is the same as it was back then. Ethics changes with every generation, but morality is a constant. The one issue with the Ten Commandments is it's in the negative, thou shalt not. So the question comes up, so what do I do? How should I live my life? So what happened is people came up with lots of, basically lists of good behaviors. This passage from Micah struck me when I went through RCIA. It just seems to make so much sense. But the problem is that it may be a little too simple. Like the word good, what does good mean? Is good for me the same as good for you? Or something good for me, bad for you? It gets complicated pretty quickly. The people came up with many lists or codes of behavior of what they considered to be good. And the typical practice was to come up with a list first, get people to change their behavior, and ultimately make it something enforceable, like a law. So it became a little legalistic. And also, just by being given this list doesn't really help with your understanding. But even then, they knew that living the good life was about being truly happy. And that happens when you create habits for a lifetime, habits that are ingrained over the course of a lifetime that lead to virtue. This quote from that's Ezekiel. I think I put Exodus there, but that's Ezekiel. So if a wicked man turns away from the sins he committed, he shall live because of the virtue he has practiced. So even then, they understood the importance of virtue. What's different about Christian morality? We sometimes need to be reminded that Christianity was a cultural revolution. It was really radically different from how people thought or behaved. For example, Jesus changed the definition of neighbor. There's a quote from Pope Benedict in his first encyclical. So the neighbor is not the one who lives on the left or right. My neighbor is anyone who needs my help, who wants my help, have my needs to help, whom I can help. In other words, it could be anyone, anywhere, a different country, a different race. Your neighbor under Christianity meant something very different. And the other thing it meant is that you weren't limited to being a good neighbor to Christians. It was to everyone. As St. Paul said, it's no longer Jew or Greek, no longer slave or free. All are equal. So it's not enough to focus on your own life and your own virtuosity. You must also look to your neighbor. Christianity teaches us that everyone matters. It's not just the elites that matter. There were laws back then. For example, in the Roman world, they had the 12 tables of law. But every single one of those laws was there to enforce the elites, to keep them and their treasure in place. If you were not one of the elites, you literally did not matter. This is, again, where Christianity is so radical. Christians were not quiet about the police. And they often criticized even emperors. This is one of the reasons they were persecuted. The Jews were people set apart, and they kept their beliefs pretty much to themselves. Christians were not like that. And when they did speak out, that's one reason they did get persecuted. This quote from Justin Martyr, he was writing to the emperor to explain Christianity. We have been taught that it is wicked to expose even newly born children. and then we'd be murderers. Life was cheap back then. In most households, the male head of the household would decide who gets to live and who doesn't. That's not necessarily the father, it could be a grandfather or another patriarch of the family. They valued male children because boys could grow up and be put to work. Girls could be an unwanted expense. And very often, the male head of the household would look at the child and say yes or no. And if he didn't want the child, they were generally left out. They were exposed, left to die. Or a possible worse fate is to be picked up by ruthless people and lead a terrible life. And that wasn't just in Rome, that was all over the Mediterranean world. Life was cheap. So this brings us to an interesting point. Early in the life of the church, so what did they teach people? The equivalent of RCA, the councils were well off in the future, doctrine was still undefined. So what they ended up teaching people was morality, because Christian morality was so different from what the rest of the world did or believed. And why did it take a year or two to teach them? Because it takes a long time to change who you are, change your beliefs, to develop these good habits. So that's what the catechumenate was in the early years, is teaching people how to be moral. Christians believe in the resurrection of the body as integral to the person. And wherever the church spread, this practice spread of burying the dead. Because prior to that, the dead were considered trash. They'd be thrown out in the street, picked up with the rest of the trash, and burned. There's a famous passage from the physician Galen, who was writing in the 3rd century. There was a plague going on in Rome. It wasn't a common plague, it's probably cholera or something like that. When the family member got sick, people would often throw the family member out because they didn't want to infect anybody else in the family. Or if someone died, again, they got thrown in the street. And then physician Galen wrote that it was the Christians who came along and picked up the sick people and treated them. The Christians who came along and would pick up people and bury them. No one else was doing this. So Christians very early on were ministering to non-Christians. That's all I have to say about the history of morality. Is there any comments or questions at this point? Okay. Virtue is about attaining a true and objective happiness, not merely feeling happy. Virtue is about realizing the capacity of human nature to have a fully human life. People rarely think about morality being the key to happiness. However, many of us have a vision of living a good life, which is about becoming a good person, and being truly happy. Virtue shows how our actions are not external to us and modify shape or character. So we become a certain kind of person through each and every decision we make. A life of virtue or vice is not a result of a single decision. There's a path of 1,000 decisions that leads one way or the other. Virtue requires training. It takes a lot of effort to ingrain these habits. It's a little bit like starting off in athletics. At first, you feel awkward and clumsy, but with practice, it gets to be more fluid. An example is, we moved here from Houston in June, and we get to see our granddaughter play soccer. So we've seen a couple of seasons of soccer. The first year, they literally all ran around in a huddle. They'd stand around in groups kicking at the ball. But we saw a game more recently where they actually had breakaways. They were passing the ball. They were getting better at it. And the same is true with virtue. It takes practice. And similar to athletics, if you practice poorly, it can lead to bad habits. So the moral life is creating ingrained habits over time. So Thomas Aquinas says, good is to be done and evil avoided. So becoming a virtuous person is about creating the habits that make it possible and doing good and avoiding evil. So what we've been talking about is virtue ethics, or virtue morality, or virtue theology. And this is the philosophy that comes the closest to Catholic teaching. But the Catholic version begins with our desire to attain happiness, then moves on to habits, and then moves on to virtue. Where the other disciplines began with a list, and people monitor habits, and then ended with law. The Catholic version begins with what makes you happy, the Beatitudes. So these are the 5 teaching principles we're going to talk about more in the next few slides. All of these are right out of the Catechism. Made in the image of God, the most basic principle of Christian moral life is the awareness that every person bears the dignity of being made in the image of God. He's given us an immortal soul, the gifts of intelligence and reason that enable us to understand the order of things. He's given us the free will to seek and love what is true, good, and beautiful. Human life is to stem from all other forms of life, since it alone is imprinted with the image of the Creator. So within us is both a powerful surge towards the good, because we are made in the image of Christ, or God, and at the same time the darker impulse towards sin, because of the effects of original sin. We should remember that Christ dying and rising offers us new life in the Spirit. Therefore we speak of virtue, speak of the value, dignity, and goal of human life as a profound unity of physical and spiritual dimensions, and that human life is sacred. It's distinct from all other forms of life, it's imprinted with the very image of the Creator. So once again, human life is sacred. The responsible practice of freedom. Without freedom, we cannot speak meaningfully about morality or moral responsibility. Freedom is the God-given power to become who He created us to be and share eternal union with Him. Christian morality and God's law are not arbitrary. They're specifically given to us for our happiness. Human freedom lies in our free decision to say yes to God. So human freedom is more than the capacity to choose between this or that. It's a power given to us by God. He gives us the intelligence and the capacity to act freely. In contrast, many people today understand human freedom merely as the ability to make a choice, often based on feeling. Much of the modern world is focused on satisfying our feelings. This may lead to short-term happiness, but continual fulfillment of feelings eventually leads to unhappiness, which is why we need these principles of Christian morality. We cannot become the person God wants us to be until we learn who we really are and how the gift of grace has shaped our intellectual and moral being. It's through the dying and rising of Jesus Christ that we can be brought into full communion. Understanding moral ethics. This may be the hardest part to understand because the terms are a little awkward. Every moral act consists of 3 elements. The objective act, which is what we do, the intention, why we do it, and the concrete situation or circumstance in which we perform the act. For an individual act to be morally good, the intention or what we are doing must be objectively good. Some acts are always wrong because they go against basic human good. So if we are motivated by a bad intention, then our action is morally evil. An example would be stealing food to feed a family. Feeding a family is a good act. Stealing to do that is not. So that makes it morally evil. Cheating on an exam would be another example. Or the outcome may be very good, where you get a good grade, a good job, but the intention is wrong. And I have to tell you, there's a huge amount of things on the internet on this very topic. So if you're interested, I urge you to look into it on your own. We move on to the formation of conscience. Conscience represents the more general ability we have as human beings to know what is good and right. Conscience also represents the concrete judgments we make in particular situations, concerning what we should do or about what we've already done. Each baptized follower of Christ is obliged to form his or her own conscience. Moral choices confront us with the decision to follow or to depart from reason and the divine law. Good conscience makes judgments that conform to reason and the good that is willed by the wisdom of God. A good conscience requires a lifetime of formation. It takes more than going through an RCI program. It's your responsibility as a Christian to continue to develop an informed conscience. This is true for whatever your choices are. Helping a neighbor, obeying local laws, performing an act of charity, even deciding how to vote. All these things are opportunities to exercise and form your conscience. The Christian moral life is one that seeks to cultivate and practice virtue. Here's a quote from the Catechism. A virtue is a habitual and firm disposition to do the good. It allows the person not only to perform good acts, but to give the best of himself. So human virtues form the soul with the habits of the mind, will support moral behavior, control passions, and very importantly, avoid sin. And you can acquire the virtues in a number of ways. Frequent repetition of virtuous acts, good example of others, education, and God's grace. Virtues guide our conduct according to the dictates of faith and reason, leading us toward freedom based on self-control, toward joy, and living a good moral life. Each of the 10 Commandments forbids a sin, but each also points to a virtue that will help us avoid these sins. We here at St. Henry have a unique opportunity to see this. Soon the project of the narthex will be finished soon, very soon.
For Easter.
Next week. Very soon. But what we have, on one side of the narthex, you have the 7 major sins, and on the other side, you have the offsetting virtue that helps you avoid the sin. This is an excellent teaching tool, and an excellent reminder of the importance of God's grace overcoming our tendency to sin. And a personal opinion about virtue is that we are not enough of us practice virtues in our lives. And there's been a lot of scholarship starting in the 20th century about the importance of virtue. And there are many people who have said that if you get enough people together to practice virtue, you can heal all of the divisions in our society and in the world. We could take a group like this, and if we all seriously practice the virtues, we could heal political division in this country. That's how powerful virtue is. Then I don't have a slide for this, but the next handout is a Word document. It's a blue chart. Something I borrowed from the internet. It displays the 7 deadly or major sins in the first column, and the corresponding virtue to help avoid that sin in another column. There are many variations on this chart that have different names for the sins, different definitions, different virtues, names of the virtues. But I like this one because it has the sins in the same sequence as in Dante's Purgatorio. That's the middle work of the Divine Comedy. In Dante's journey through purgatory, he had to begin at the bottom, at the level of lust, and work his way up through each of the 7 sins to pride. This is how they were ranked back in the 14th century. It may be different today. So the sequence followed by Dante is referred to as the 7-story mountain, where he had to work through each one and purge himself of that sin before he could move on to the next one, and ultimately to paradise. So we don't have time tonight to get into definitions of the vices and the virtues, but perhaps when you go back to your tables, you can talk about that. And also, there's a place to note any action that you can take to help avoid sin. That's all I have. Thank you.
So do we have any questions at all about Christian morality?
When he recommended the internet, where would you go to look deeper into what you were referring to?
Which internet site?
There's many out there.
It's back. They're back. So, I'm sorry. Yes.
The question that I remember a long time ago, my mother and I went to Tijuana, Mexico, and I went to a little jewelry shop, and my mother chose a necklace to wear and put I think, a $20 bill on the counter. And then we were talking, and then 2 seconds later, turned around and the $20 was gone. And it wasn't gone anymore. And they had no idea. The person who was helping us had no idea. Didn't know there was a $20 bill there. In other words, somebody took it on the other side of the counter. Now, my mom and I were saying maybe that person was very poor and just needed money to go to the grocery store and buy groceries for 25 children or whatever. From that person's point of view, was that a sinful act to steal their $20? Or was it thinking, what if he were thinking first about his family?
Well, what you have to do is you have to get into what's in the motivation within that person's head, and that's where you deal with forming a conscience. And my understanding, am I correct? And so that the reality is we don't know in terms of whether that is a sin, whether that person knowingly committed a sin or not. When I think of a sin that's just so deliberate and intentional is from St. Augustine's Confessions. St. Augustine was, he's one of the church fathers. Does anybody, I don't know, have we talked about St. Augustine at all? Okay, St. Augustine lived in about the 5th century AD. He lived in he lived in Carthage, or near Carthage in Hippo in North Africa, and he led quite a wild life as a young man. His mother, St. Monica. Yeah, I got it. I always get Monica and Helen mixed up. Constantine. St. Monica was Christian, but his father was a pagan and Roman official. And so when Augustine was a young man, he led a pretty wild life, to say the least. He had a live-in girlfriend, had at least one or more children, and he was part of a debating, sort of almost a debating society. Well, anyway, he eventually converted to Christianity, and in his Confessions, which is if you've not read it, it is an excellent work. It's a quote biography, but it's a spiritual biography, I think is the best way to put it. He talks in terms of when he was a young boy that he and these other boys stole some pears from a pear tree. It's a famous story. And when he stole the pears, they did it for the worst reason in the world, and that is they did it for the sake of stealing. They didn't steal them to eat them. In fact, they threw them away. But the point of it is that he, in looking back at that, realized that how that was the worst sin that you could commit, is to commit a sin for the sake of committing the sin, so to speak. Now, getting back to your question, that person's committing a sin objectively. They're committing a crime, you know. But it's a question of what's in their conscience. And each person has to form their conscience. No two people's consciences are formed exactly the same. And as Jeff was saying, what I think is very, very important is that that is a lifelong, ongoing process. You don't stop. You don't graduate and say, okay, now that I've passed RCIA, I can stop learning about my Catholic faith, and more particularly, I can stop learning about forming a more refined conscience. I think that's very important because it means that we have greater obligations. The more that we learn, the greater the obligation to try and be, as Jeff said, a virtuous person by these good habits. And what happens is, the more you work on it, the more a sin is like if you're wearing a white garment and there's a little stain on it. It just drives you crazy, and that's what happens when you commit little sins. When you are trying to lead a virtuous life, it becomes that. But that's where we're at. I mean, it's not a bad thing. I think that we're to try and to lead that life. It's all wrapped up in, as Jeff said, love God and love your neighbor. And what I say about the Ten Commandments is that the Ten Commandments were really written as a baseline, as a starting point for the people of Israel. In order to love God and love your neighbor, you have to not steal, not kill, not have false idols. That's just the sort of the outward actions. And what Jesus did was he raised the bar, and he said it's not just that you can't murder, it's that if you have murder in your heart, or if you have lust in your heart, then you've committed a sin. But the point of all that is that it's not so much being judgmental about what you're doing as it is that you're trying and striving to love God to the best you can. And God loves you, and you know that's what as I said before, the sacrament of reconciliation is all about. Is that we're not they're not, priests are not judging you when you go into the confessional. You're unburdening yourself of that sin, and you're admitting it to someone who is in the shoes of Christ, and they are forgiving you, and you can then do the penance and then go back to trying to be a better and better person, because that's what it's all about. And so anyway, I'm sorry I got off on a tangent there. Any other questions? It's a tough topic because it deals with things that people, you begin to think to yourself, well, how good of a person do I have to be? Well, you're never there, if you know what I mean. It never ends. You're always trying to be better and better. So, okay, if there's no other questions, Jody? Jody Pinckney is with the Legion of Mary, and for those people who are coming to the retreat, well, actually we'll give them to everybody, but we're going to give them to the people who are coming to the retreat when they come to the retreat, and we're going to bless them at the retreat, because they've not been blessed, right? Or have they? The rosaries. Some
of them have by Father Shinto, and some of them I wasn't sure, so...
Well, I'm just going to bless them all again. About that. It's like when I was blessing the water, I did some baptisms this weekend, and I was blessing the water, and I said, this water's been blessed 1,000 times, but I'm going to bless it again, so no harm. So, but anyway, Jody is with the Legion of Mary, and, they meet every Thursday morning, and they have a particular devotion to Mary, and they are giving us these rosaries, and we're going to pray a rosary during the retreat. And if you haven't prayed it together, it's a very different experience than when you pray it by yourself. I usually pray it in the car going to work, so I don't get mad at people. So, Jody.
babysitting just popped up on my calendar. I don't think that's me. My daughter babysits.
Good evening. I first want to say congratulations to all of you who are joining the Catholic Church. I will be praying for you on April 8th, which is not that far away. I'm here tonight, like Mike said, to speak on the Legion of Mary. The Legion of Mary is a lay apostolic association of Catholics under the power and leadership of Mary, our Blessed Mother, the Mother of God. And we go and we serve the church and our neighbor on a volunteer basis. The Legion of Mary is in 170 countries. It was founded by Frank Duff in Dublin, Ireland in 1921. We just celebrated the 100th birthday on September 7, 2021. Our Presidium, which is our group here at St. Henry's, we meet every Thursday morning. It's open to men and women. We have 11 active members right now and a few auxiliary members. We meet every Thursday, just like Mike said, at 9 o'clock in the church and upstairs. Y'all are all welcome to join Catholics. We have officers, a president, secretary, and a treasurer. We begin with the rosary. All of the 11 of us are very devout and devoted to the Blessed Mother. We love the Blessed Mother very much. After the rosary, we give our report. In the Legion of Mary, you are to give, if you can, 2 hours a week of spiritual works of mercy in the community. And that can be like some go to Westmead to visit, take communion. Others go to, well, COVID really put a damper on a lot of things that we were doing. But Queen of Mary, over at Queen of Mary, we also visit over there. There's a new place that I've been going that I really enjoy, and that's Heart of Mary Hospice House at St. Edward's. And it's for people who get terminally ill, have like 3 months to live. And they are DNR, do not resuscitate patients there. And we go over there and volunteer. And you do not have to belong to the Legion of Mary. I'm not making a plug for Heart of Mary House, but they're always needing volunteers over there. That may be something you want to think about too. Volunteering at RCIA is another act that you can do for the Legion of Mary. Vicki Everly, I was her sponsor 2 years ago. And Vicki's back there in the blue sweater. And I can tell you, my work that year I did RCIA, but I am so glad I did, because now I have one wonderful new friend that I am so glad that we have been friends now since the very first day that we did RCIA. Let's see, what else do we do? Oh, one other thing that we do, went door to door, and this was hard. There's a priest, Father John O'Neill, down in Hohenwald, and he's the priest for 3 parishes, Hohenwald, Centerville, and Waynesboro. And I went down there with him, and we did door-to-door knocking. Blessed Mother and for the Legion of Mary. And he will tell you too, that is hard. That was very, very hard. But I can honestly tell my grandchildren that day, well, I've gone a couple times, I walked the streets of Hohenwald with a real saint. He is wonderful. His love for God and his love for the Blessed Mother is, I hope one day you get to meet him, not Dr., Father John O'Neill. And after we give our reports, what we've done for the week, we pray for those who have asked us to pray for them, and we pray for those who we know need prayers. And I was just going to say one more thing about the rosary. And I spoke to Vicki just a second ago, and this is from both of us, that if ever anyone needs, after you do the rosary Saturday, or help with the rosary, I would love nothing more than to, especially with the weather getting warm, to sit at the grotto outside and say the rosary with you. And Vicki would too. And that would be a Legion of Mary work for us to do too, also. Another just quick suggestion during Lent that I wrote down is to pray with your children, for the ones that have children that are young, especially during Lent. Pray with your children the rosary and let that be part of your event, especially with Passion Week coming up. And let the children each take a decade and let them offer it for whatever or whoever. If they want to pray for their dog, let them pray for their dog. Whatever, let them be involved. And also there's Stations of the Cross, on Friday nights. That's a wonderful thing during Lent for a family to do. I began the Legion of Mary at Christ the King when I was a little girl and did the Junior Legion of Mary. And at that time, on Saturday morning, every Saturday morning, we went over to the rectory and we hand folded all of the bulletins back then. And then on Sunday, we kept the nursery, the children in the nursery. Well then, there was no Legion of Mary during high school. And then I got married and I've raised 8 children and worked part-time and whatever. So until I could retire, I wasn't able to join the Legion of Mary. I was just too busy with family. So I've always had such love for the Blessed Mother. I know I owe that to my own mother and my grandmother. They both love the Blessed Mother. I'm going to end with a little prayer that my mother used to say to us, and her mother said to her in just a second. But I just want to say, I hope you can develop a relationship with your Heavenly Mother. She loves you very, very much. I know that. And it has brought me so much joy just knowing the Blessed Mother. So I'm going to say this little prayer that my mother used to say to us. To Our Lady, lovely lady dressed in blue, teach me how to pray. God was just your little boy. Tell me what to say. Did you lift him up sometimes, gently on your knee? Did you sing to him the way my mother does to me? Did you hold his hand at night? Did you ever try telling stories of the world? Oh, and did he cry? Do you really think he cares if I tell him things? Little things that happen? And do the angels' wings make a noise? And can he hear me if I speak low? Does he understand me now? Tell me, for you know. Lovely lady dressed in blue, teach me how to pray. God was just your little boy, and you know the way. Thank you.
I'm just curious, how many people have prayed the rosary? Okay, so we will do that at the retreat for those who come to the retreat. The rosary is a prayer. It has a whole history to it, but just briefly, it has several purposes. It can have many different purposes, but the rosary itself, there's 4 different mysteries. There's this joyous mysteries, which are about the birth of Jesus and his youth. And then there's the luminous mysteries, which are about his ministry on earth from the time of his baptism through the Last Supper, through the institution of the Eucharist, as they say. Then it's the passion of Jesus, the sorrowful mysteries, which starts with the agony of the garden and ends with the crucifixion. And then finally, the glorious mysteries, which start with the resurrection and end with the Coronation of Mary, Queen of Heaven. And so the point of it is that you pray these Hail Marys and you ponder each of these mysteries as you go through them. So there's like each day, during Lent, I pray the sorrowful mysteries, except on Sundays when I pray the glorious mysteries. So I'm pondering Jesus being in the Garden of Gethsemane and being abandoned, and I'm pondering the scourging at the pillar, and I'm pondering the, it's gone blank. Crowning thorns, yes, I'm sorry. Crowning with thorns. Then, of course, the bearing of the cross and the crucifixion. And so it can be said for many reasons. One is meditating on those. Another is that you're saying the rosary for somebody, for some petition. And it gets to this question of, well, why are you praying? Why are you saying these things to Mary? Well, it's like if you ask somebody to pray for you, a friend, then this is what this is Mary is a friend. But more importantly, and this, I didn't learn this until I was going through a catechism class to be able to teach, this was before I became a deacon, to be able to teach catechism. And one of the sisters from the Dominican, one of the Dominican sisters explained, I had always missed, let me say this, I never understood what was the crowning Mary Queen of Heaven about, what was the importance of that. And she pointed out that why would you crown Mary Queen of Heaven? She's the mother of Jesus. She's not, it's not king and queen. But she said it is. In Western European culture, you have the king, and the queen is the wife of the king, right? Does that make sense? Everybody knows that. In the culture of the ancient Mediterranean, the queen was the mother of the king and considered to be the closest advisor. And so Mary, therefore, that's why you're praying that way. That's why you're praying for Mary, or to Mary. You're asking her to intercede for you because she has, as Father Bill Fleming used to say, she has his ear, So, but anyway, I just got off on a tangent there, but I just wanted to say, and thank you very much for the rosaries, and I think it is part of our, it is one of the many things that's part of our Catholic tradition, which is so robust. There are so many different ways to pray. I'm reading a book right now on Christian prayer, or Catholic prayer, not Christian prayer, and it has all the different traditions. And there's Franciscans, there's Dominicans, there's the Ignatians, there's the Benedictines. These are all different ways of praying, and it's wonderful. And it doesn't say that you have to pray this way or that way or this way. You get to try out, and whichever ones at the particular moment you feel led to pray, and that's what's working for you. Let it work. One last thing about the nights, and John is the only knight left. Are you the last standing knight? Anyway, the knights do things that a lot of times are unseen, as the Legion of Mary does too. One of the things the knights do not every Saturday, but they do it on certain Saturdays, is, have you ever noticed between St. Henry and Kroger's, the side of the road is pretty well kept. That's because the Knights go out and do pick up litter. Is it once every 3 months? Okay, it's once every 3 months, good. I did it once, I think. It was an experience. Cars traveling 60 or 70 miles an hour when they're supposed to be traveling 45. So anyway, I do think we have a little bit of time to talk about the questions, so if you can break up into to the tables. Oh, you're pointing. Yes, ma'am.
Tell them about the stained glass windows in the chapel, too.
Oh, the luminous mysteries? Yeah, the stained glass windows in the chapel are the luminous mysteries, which were, when we built that chapel, that was the idea, is to do the luminous mysteries. And the luminous mysteries, okay, I'll see if I know mine. Luminous mysteries are the baptism of Jesus. Let me get them now. The baptism of Jesus, the wedding at Cana, the Great Proclamation, the Transfiguration, and the institution of the Eucharist. I know. So anyway, if you guys could break up into small groups and talk about those questions, that would be great.